Good morning. Thanks for joining us today. As you come in, we'd love to hear who's in the room. So if you would take a moment to share in the chat what organization you're with, what part of California you're joining us from, or if you're outside of California, would love to know that too. Just take a moment to pop that into the chat so we can get a sense of who we all are today. Welcome, Lily from SoCal Grantmakers. Great to have you, one of the co-sponsors of today. Hi, Jennifer. Welcome. And hello, Robert. Thanks for your help running the webinar today. Hi, Emily. Good morning. A couple of LA folks already. If you're just joining us, please take a minute to let us know where organizationally and where in California you're joining us from as we get ready to kick off today's California Policy Forum. Hi, Alana. Welcome. From 211, great to have you here. Good. Okay. Well, hey, let's kick it off on time as people continue to join us. So welcome, everyone. Good morning. Happy Wednesday morning. My name is Laura Seaman. I'm with the League of California Community Foundations. We are a statewide coalition of place-based funders all across California. And we are part of the group that convenes this quarterly, a few times a year, program called the California Policy Forum. We are doing this in partnership with Cal Nonprofits, the California Association of Nonprofits, our state's nonprofit coalition, as well as with Philanthropy California, which is a coalition of 3 regional associations of grant makers. That's Northern California Grant Makers, Southern California Grant Makers, and Catalyst of San Diego and Imperial County. So thank you to our co-sponsors today for bringing this program together. A little bit of housekeeping. We're probably pretty familiar with Zoom at this point, but in terms of the 3 important pieces of the webinar infrastructure here, if you have a question, please use that middle button, the Q&A button, to submit a question to the panelists or to the moderators. You can use the chat function to introduce yourself. We hope everyone takes a minute right now to let us know where you're joining us from, what's your organization, what part of California are you in, or outside of the state. And then if you'd like closed captions for today's webinar, you can find that on the bottom of your screen, the CC button, and those will appear also on the bottom of your screen if you enable that feature. If you have any tech needs today, you have any issues with the platform or a question about one of these functions, Q&A, closed caption, chat, etc., please reach out to Event Tech, Cal Nonprofits. That's the person behind the scenes helping to run this. The question we get most frequently is, will this be recorded? Will there be slides and resources afterward? And the answer is yes, absolutely. So within a week or so, you'll get an email, and that'll be coming from Cal Nonprofits. That'll have a recording of today's full session. It'll include a summary of any resources that were mentioned, any links that came through in the chat that are relevant to the discussion. So keep a lookout for that. And please feel free to share that with your colleagues, with other folks at your organization that may be interested in today's topic but couldn't join us. Let me pause and say a quick welcome to the folks who've just popped in. So hi to Jerry from Richmond, Linda from Santa Cruz. Hi, Rachel. Great to see you in the chat in Redding and also Palo Alto. Hi to Caitlin and hi, Paul. Thanks for joining us today. I want to let everyone know that in addition to the recording and resources from today's session, we also keep an archive, our folks at Cal Nonprofits keep an archive on their website of recent past events. So I mentioned this is an ongoing series. We do 3 or 4 of these a year, all on different topics. And the slide you're seeing now is a summary of a few that we've done in the last 2 to 3 years or so. You'll find the resources for all of those, the recordings, again, on the Cal Nonprofits website. We would love to know during this session, after this session, really at any time throughout the year, what policy-related topics would it help your organization, whether you're a nonprofit, a funder, community group, to know more about, to demystify, to get the lay of the land, and to hear from policy experts about. So consider this an open invitation to reach out to us at any time with ideas or requests for content for the future of the California Policy Forum. Let me take a moment to welcome and also to thank our three speakers today. I'm going to give them each a chance to introduce themselves in just a moment. If you could let us know your role, your organization, and how your job intersects with today's topic. I'm going to go ahead and start with Abby.
Good morning. My name is Abby Browning. I'm the Chief of the Office of Private Sector NGO Coordination at the California Governor's Office of Emergency Services. How my job intersects with disaster and crisis is that that's all I do all day, every day. My life is circled around disaster, either response, recovery, or most importantly, preparedness for the next event that's coming. So that's my thing.
Great, thanks. Mike, over to you.
Yeah, I'm Mike Dayton. I'm the Chief Consultant for the Committee on Emergency Management, and look forward to having a great conversation and figuring out how we can work better together. Thank you.
Great. And Julia.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Julia DiNatale, Vice President of Impact with Napa Valley Community Foundation. We're a pretty small shop, and so my job is around philanthropic advising as well as managing all of our discretionary grant making and initiatives. And unfortunately, a large percentage of our initiatives are centered around disaster. We have given away about a little more than $100 million in our 29-year history, and a third of that has been around disaster. And so I'm de facto disaster program officer at this point.
Great. Thanks, everyone, for those quick intros. We'll hear a lot more from each of those three speakers. Let me back up again to today's topic and the reason that we have all come together on this Wednesday morning. Disasters and crises, however we define those, are impacting more and more Californians every year, as you're likely seeing in your own work, no matter what kind of an organization or what kind of a community you're representing today in the audience. And our nonprofits, our state's social sector writ large, including funders, often find themselves on the front lines of responding to events, of preparing for events, and of helping vulnerable communities across California who are most impacted by disasters and crises. So today's session is all about, as a nonprofit or philanthropy leader, even if it's not your day job, maybe especially if it's not your day job, as it isn't for most of us, what should we know about the landscape at the state government level, and the kind of policy mechanisms, the government agencies that we should understand that are important in terms of shaping disaster management, response, disaster preparedness, and resilience in California. We'll also hear some lessons that our sector has learned, sometimes the hard way, from responding and preparing for recent crises, including the many overlapping disasters and crises that we've all experienced the last couple of years. And then we'll spend some time talking about how nonprofits and funders can help prepare their communities to be more resilient to future disasters, and spotlight some policy ideas and priorities that are emerging in the state legislature. So let's turn it back over to the first of our speakers today, Abby Browning with California Office of Emergency Services.
Thank you. So again, I'm Abby. It is very nice to be here. I'm very happy to talk to the folks that are represented here on this webinar, simply because you guys are the ones that are out in the field. You do the work, you work with our communities, and you are the ones that are the frontline folks who can actually help people prepare and recover from the disaster. I always like to say there's only so many firefighters, there's only so many police officers. And so you really are people that are the first responders, because you think, I got to check on my folks. I got to check on our clients. I got to check on our partners to see how they are handling whatever the disaster is. So all of that saying, thank you for everything that you do for Californians. So a little bit about the California Governor's Office of Emergency Services. We are an office of the governor. And so the way that I like to describe it is that the governor has his main office proper, and then there are 3 specialty offices underneath of that. Underneath of that is where all of the agencies are, the Health and Human Services Agency, the Natural Resources Agency, et cetera. And so we are kind of his action arm. We respond to all disasters in California, and we are a coordinating body. So what that means is that when a disaster happens, all of the subject matter experts, the heads of the different agencies that respond, come to Cal OES, and they all sit in this room. It's kind of like the situation room, if you will. And they make decisions, and they advise the governor or the commander, whoever it is that is in charge of responding to the disaster, on what's the best way to do it and what are the resources that we have that we can bring to the table. In disasters, all disasters are local. In California, we're very much a home rule state. Locals drive the bus, and what we do as a state is we support their efforts. If there's an evacuation that takes place during a fire or something like that, the evacuation is determined by the local sheriff, the local authorities. We do not in Sacramento go, we're going to evacuate San Diego County. No, we don't do that. San Diego makes that decision, and then we support their decision and help them with what we can do. If we have resources for shelters, then we can provide that. If we have resources, if they need additional fire trucks or police officers, we can help coordinate that through our mutual aid system. We also help with the biggest thing, which would be financial support, because disasters are very expensive. And so we can support that. And then we are the ones, through our office, the governor can request federal support from the president and FEMA to come in and assist. But all of that saying, we are the ones that support the local government in their decision making and in their response. How does that work? Interesting. Every disaster in California is different. Our next speaker actually probably could tell you more about it than I could, because he used to be on the local level as well. But every disaster, every response is very different. And so every time that we go out, it's a different experience. And so that's why it's so important to have these relationships before the disaster, because you have to trust the folks that are coming. You have to trust the people that, I know who the person is in San Diego, so I can call them up and be like, okay, what do you need? And they know who I am to call and answer the call. My role in particular is a very interesting role. California has this. Many of our other sister states do not have this, or if they do, they're certainly not as a high level position as my position is. I think that goes to show California's importance on the whole community, and the importance that our private sector, our nonprofit partners, our philanthropy partners, the role that they play in the disaster cycle is why my job exists. I am, for lack of a better way of saying it, an overpaid matchmaker. I'm a liaison. I basically represent all of you in those meetings. So I don't sit at the table when the decisions are being made, but I am in the room. I pay attention to what's happening, and I can raise my voice if there's an issue that's happening that might affect someone. A perfect example is there was a fire coming a few years ago. I got a phone call from one of our large medical systems saying, hey, this fire is coming towards our data center, and I don't know if CAL FIRE knows that. And I was able to talk to the incident commander and say, that building right there, that's the data system for this hospital system. And it's going to, if it goes out, then we're going to have a big problem throughout California, not just this area. And so they were able to have that situational awareness. I was able to put that information in front of them. Likewise, I'm able to take the information that I know. I don't know any classified or secret information. I can't keep my mouth shut, so I kind of stay away from those things. And so anything that I know, you can know. And so if something's going on, a disaster's happening, and you want to, what's going on? I heard this and this is not right and blah, blah, blah. You can call me up or send me a note and I'll tell you exactly what's happening. What I know, I'll tell you. I have no problems. I want you to see me as your voice and as your ears in the event. The most important role that I play, I think, is in the recovery piece, because the recovery takes everyone. I mean, you just heard Julia talk about the amount of money that her community foundation has distributed over the years for disasters. That is huge, and that is all about recovery. That's immediate recovery. That's getting folks into into a hotel, or they lost their job for a month because they were evacuated and they need help that way. Or that's a long-term community, that's rebuilding, or we need to put some money into this park here so the kids actually have a place to go, or there's community programs and projects, or supporting those nonprofits that are on the ground doing that work. Because whether or not you're a disaster nonprofit before the disaster, I guarantee that after the disaster, you will be a disaster nonprofit, no matter what it is. And so having those relationships and making that coordinating element, that's where my matchmaking comes into play, because I will listen to you and say, oh, that's what you do. You know who you should really talk to is so-and-so over here who's doing something similar. And I think there's good synergy there. I can also make those connections for our local governments. As I said, disasters are local. They start local, but they also end local. At the end of the day, in your community, it's your community that's recovering. I mean, I can help you as much as I possibly can as the state, but ultimately you're the one doing the work, and you're the one that has to live there and is driving the bus as far as what the recovery elements are. And so I try to assist that. Now, many of our local governments do not have the luxury of having a personnel that can be dedicated to nonprofits and private sector and philanthropy, et cetera. As every agency, they're stretched pretty thin, especially with all the disasters we keep having. And so a lot of times I will serve that role for them. I have a good relationship with our local emergency managers in all 58 counties. And then I can be that voice for them. I can make phone calls for them. And then I can convene groups and work on their behalf. And so that's another thing that I do. And so one of the questions that was brought to me was, what is essential for nonprofits and funders to know about disaster preparedness in California, as well as what I would improve about the disaster preparedness in California. One of the things that I think that's essential for everyone to know is that it's happening. I think that one of the biggest issues that I have is so much of this work. There's so many amazing people throughout the state that are dedicated to this work and dedicated to their communities. They're not only just the government and the first responders. There's a lot of people that are nonprofits that's what they do is dealing with disasters, and they think about these things and they try to prepare for these things. And I want people to know that this is happening, that it is happening in your community. You may not see it, but it is. And there's always a place for you at the table if you want to join in and support or help or be in the know of what's going on. And so that's a really big thing, because a lot of times people are like, I don't know. I mean, I don't think that anybody in my community is thinking about this. I guarantee you somebody is, especially in California. We do not have the luxury of thinking about if a disaster is going to happen to us. every single Californian knows it could happen today and it could happen to you. So therefore, there are always people thinking. And so getting connected with that community, with those folks is such a very important thing. And then what would I improve on it? That's a difficult thing to say. Improving means that you kind of know what you're striving towards. And honestly, the biggest thing that I have concern-wise is that we don't know what's next. 4 years ago, I would never, ever have thought I would have dealt with a global pandemic. Ever in a million years would I have thought. Let me tell you, when the governor had to shut down the state, that wonderful day, I found out about an hour before it was going to happen. I personally was freaking out. I'm an economic person. I know my businesses, and I know my what that means, and it scared the life out of me. And I was freaking out. I was just like, I've never in a million years did I think that something like that would happen. Another thing, 13 atmospheric rivers in January and March. I mean, we're the drought state. We've been no water, no water, no water. And then all of a sudden, I was telling people, stop praying for water. We got enough. We're good. We're good. We don't need any more water, because it's like, you never, ever know what's coming. And I hesitate to imagine, because it'll just be there. It'll just be worse. So improving it's just, I think, is just knowing people and being a part of the community that is responding, and just being flexible. I think that just more, no matter what it is, what you're doing, it's never going to be enough. And so just keep trucking and doing more. And so that would be the improvement side of things. But again, I'm always extremely impressed and amazed at the unbelievable resilience of Californians, and the generosity of Californians. That's one of the things I often talk to my sister states. And I'm originally from another state, but I've been here for 20 some years. So I'd like to think that this is my home. But there's always such a negative connotation for Californians. You guys all know this. But I've never seen resiliency, and I've never seen generosity like I've seen in California. And I think it's because we know it could be us. It doesn't matter where you live. It doesn't matter how much money you make. I mean, we've seen some of the richest people in the world dealing with, the mudslides in Montecito, with the Oprahs and those people dealing with that. But then we have some of the most underserved, disadvantaged communities that are dealing with the fires that are raging through there. It really doesn't matter where you are or who you are. If you are in this state, you are affected by the disaster, and everyone recognizes that. And it's just really heartwarming. That's how I get through the day, honestly. Dealing with disasters, it's not a very mentally healthy job to deal with, but you see that silver lining. You see the people just bounce back, and the willingness to help and support, and it's just very heartwarming. So anyway, that I'll end my talk there, but I'm happy to answer questions.
Great, and thank you for the questions that have already come in. We'll take a pause and throw a few at Abby since she's still on the mic. How is Cal OES preparing to support extreme weather events, preparedness and response, especially for vulnerable communities? You mentioned the atmospheric rivers. I know many communities had a summer of record-breaking heat waves. We're usually in some level of a drought situation. So how do you think about extreme weather events? And the way I read that is kind of outside of what we're a little bit used to in terms of wildfires, things like that.
Yeah, well, there's twofold there. So it's actually really cool, and I wish that I could explain it more, but unfortunately, I'm not smart enough to explain it. We have some really smart scientists and state climatologists and things like that can do all these predicting. And it was fascinating during the atmospheric rivers, watching them say, okay, this is when it's going to come through. And at this time period, it's going to come through the Golden Gate Bridge and it's going to drop this amount of water. And they were right. And it was just amazing to see this predictability using either all these modelings, but then AI and the satellite data and watching it all. We're doing that for just about everything. So when the extreme heat comes in, we kind of know when this heat dome is going to be and all of this stuff. Having said that, we can pre-position resources. We move things where they need to be in order to respond. We have swiftwater vehicles. We have swiftwater rescues to try to cut that off. We know that this is going to be an issue. We don't know where the levee is going to break, but what we do know is where there's going to be a lot of water and where it's going to come over, no matter the levee is there or not. And that's where we try to do that. And we have very fortunate in California to have a lot of resources like that we can position. It's the same thing that we do with the fires. We have firefighters and folks throughout the state ready to go at a moment's notice and to try to head those off. We do the same thing with that. The same with the extreme heat. We know that these areas, and so we work with our locals saying, okay, we need cooling centers. Do you have what you need for this? Do you need more for that? Is there going to be a power issue? Do we need to work with some of our larger energy consumptions, that kind of, whatever we need to do, we try to do to make sure that the folks on the ground have what they need to respond adequately. The second part to that is the vulnerable populations. We have quite a few in California, and unfortunately, I don't really like the word vulnerable. I like to say underserved because they are. Whatever reason they're underserved, they just are. And so a lot of times they will slip through the cracks when it comes to our normal programs and our everyday response and things like that. And so what we've come up with here on the state is we have a priorities population task force. And we have that task force is made up of different agencies, different state agencies that come together that serve those. We have people that work specifically on people experiencing homelessness. You know, they had a big issue during the floods, and it wasn't your average response of just going to a shelter or just moving because all of their stuff was there. They're not going to do that. And so there was a lot of things to take into account. Another during the floods as well was our undocumented population. When the feds come in, everyone gets scared, and I don't blame them one bit. California's very strong response to that is that California is, it does not matter who you are, where you're from, or what you're experiencing. If you are in the middle of a disaster, we are going to help you. We are going to do what we can to help you. And most of my colleagues that are FEMA, federal folks, feel the same way. However, there's that connection that they have to Homeland Security, to ICE, et cetera, that really is scary. And if I were in that situation, I don't know if I'd take their word for it. And so what we had to do was take several of our state programs, but also work with our CBOs that are on the ground to try to support them. How can we help this population? We depend on this population. We rely on this population. They're our neighbors and we want to take care of them. How do we do that? And so we had specialty task forces set up to try to figure that out through these extreme events. And I guarantee you that will continue as we move forward.
Thank you so much, Abby. There's a lot there, and I think a few of those points and nuances will come up in our discussion as well. When we already have a great question about the balance, maybe the tension that we navigate, certainly that you navigate in your role between response and recovery, and then preparedness and maybe resilience writ large. So put a pin in that. We'll circle back to that question for sure, probably from all three speakers. Let me go ahead and pass it over to Mike Dayton from the Committee on Emergency Management in the California State Assembly to give us a lay of the land of what's going on in this space legislatively. Mike, over to you.
Well, thanks, Laura. Let me just first echo Abby's comments. I really have a great appreciation for everybody's work at the local level. I saw a couple in the chat that said, relationships are key, and you really can't stress that enough, that relationships are the most important thing when it comes to preparedness and especially recovery. Today, I'd just like to talk a little bit about the committee. So Laura, do you have my slides?
Yep, in just a minute. And then if you'd like to come on video, you're not yet. Just that's.
Oh, sorry about that.
All right.
Wait.
Let me get your slides back up. There we go.
Oh, great. Thank you. Thanks. Yeah, so next slide, please. Thanks. So yeah, let me just tell you a little bit about our chair. Freddie Rodriguez is a lifelong EMT from Pomona, probably one of the nicest guys in the state assembly, but he's got a passion for emergency management. One of the kindest members. They actually created this committee for him. It's one of 34 standing committees, but they created it about 3 years ago, and I'm fortunate enough to be the chief consultant and to work with him. And then the next slide, I just wanted to tell you a little bit about his history in emergency management. He was actually one of those that deployed to Hurricanes Katrina and Rita. And I think, most of you probably remember the devastation there and the extent of the disaster. But what really struck our chairman, Freddie Rodriguez, was it was the first time that he showed up with the strike team of five ambulances, and basically the incident commanders were, just go. We don't have any communications. Just go find people in need and treat those that you run across. So like what the impression on him was, California's got to do better. We can't be in a position where our resources are overwhelmed and that we don't have enough to respond to two simultaneous disasters. And then just, a little bit about me. Abby mentioned that I had some experience in San Francisco with the Department of Emergency Management, and then I was also the LIMSA administrator there. So we basically had all the pre-hospital care, all of the emergency preparedness for the city and county of San Francisco. And a lot of it was focused on managing the 911 system. So your basic, emergency for everyday life is, when you call 911. So, my main priority there was to make sure that there was an ambulance crew that could respond to emergent 911 calls, and, that our hospital departments emergency departments didn't get overwhelmed. And then I also had the fortune of being deployed to Paradise to help respond for 2 weeks there while I was in San Francisco. And part of my deployment there was I was assigned to the town manager of Paradise. And, again, similar to the chair's experience in Hurricane Katrina and Rita, that, the town was completely overwhelmed. We were working with people that not only they lost their home, but their brother, their sister, all their relatives lost their homes. The kids, schools burnt down. FEMA and Cal OES did a phenomenal job to come in and to help with the recovery efforts, as well as Cal Fire. But it, really made an impression on me that, how important, one, preparedness is, the wildfire mitigation, and also, the recovery. Because, it was just such a personal level in Paradise that, to me, Abby, that was the worst disaster California has had. Very similar to, what the Maui residents are going through right now in Lahaina. And then can I grab the next slide, please, Laura? And just really the biggest lessons learned out of Paradise was the strength of the mutual aid system has got to be stood up. So, one of our main jobs at the Committee on Emergency Management is to make sure that Cal Fire has the resources they need. And most of the mutual aid system is local. So the chairs focus a lot of his effort on making sure local fire departments have the resources, not only available for their daily response calls, but also to participate in the state's mutual aid system. And then the next slide, I wanted to give you just a overview of some of the oversight hearings that we've had. As Abby mentioned, obviously we had those 13 atmospheric rivers. So we had a hearing that really focused on, one is do we have sufficient capabilities right now and the ability to predict at a local level, flood probabilities, how much water will fall. We're working with Scripps to try to get them more resources, and also UCLA. And obviously those resources will help Cal OES and Department of Water Resources ability to predict, but also to empower local emergency managers, to issue those critical alerts and warnings at the local level to either evacuate or to shelter in place. And then we also, after the major earthquakes in Turkey and Syria, the chair has been carrying a number of seismic safety related bills. So we wanted to, take that opportunity to highlight what's going on in California, or what we think could be doing better job on seismic resiliency. And I'll talk a little bit more in detail about that when I cover some of the legislation that we're carrying. And then we also, as you see, we worked with the Agriculture Committee on agriculture's impact. The chair and I went down to Pajaro right after the floods there, and we worked with some of the community-based organizations there, and also with the now Speaker's Office on legislation to not only get CEQA exemptions, but to also get help to the people who did not qualify for federal assistance or state assistance. And then if I go to the next slide, just one of our priorities at the committee is obviously mitigating the earthquake risk in California. So we've carried a number of bills on a soft story multifamily retrofit. The chair was a champion of a bill that would have directed $250 million in general funds to the owners of soft story multifamily homes. And these are homes that, will cost $15,000 to $20,000 to retrofit an apartment. And these are folks that would actually be able to not be displaced after an earthquake. And you would lose, those critical, housing for workers. We were only able to get 15 million, but the California Earthquake Authority is now managing that program from a grant from Cal OES. So I think that is probably an area that we could figure out how to partner better together. Because, I think your folks could play a key role in helping us expand those dollars to extend the retrofit program to folks that probably wouldn't qualify or would need some financial incentive to participate. And then if I get to the next slide, we're also focused on mitigating wildfire risk in California. As I mentioned earlier, the committee's championed several $100 million to CAL FIRE, not only for staffing so that they would be in a better position to have initial attack and pre-positioning of resources. And that's something that Cal OES and Abby manages too, is the legislature has supported, an ongoing funding that essentially pays for firefighters and other staff ahead of red flag warnings to be pre-positioned to help local entities when fire conditions exist. We've also had extensive experience with public safety power shutoffs. And this is, as you're probably all familiar with, when there are red flag warnings, the utilities are, becoming more accustomed to shutting off the power in advance so that those utility lines don't spark a major fire. And then just some of the bills that the Assemblyman has carried is AB 40, which was recently signed into law by the governor. This is wall times, when sometimes if you go by your local emergency department and you see a whole bunch of ambulances there, we're trying to make sure that ambulances are available when somebody calls the 911 for emergency medical services. Unfortunately, some of the, my own boss, the chair, was once at a hospital emergency department for 12 hours on a 24-hour shift. So when we take those firefighters and EMTs and paramedics, away from their ability to respond to calls, that's can result in, nobody being available when you call 911. So that was one of the chair's priorities. We're also working on a public education campaign for how to use the 911 system better. And then we had a bill that would have had Cal OES focus or lend more support to opioid task forces across the state. So I know we'll probably come back and work with Abby and her team on maybe a better approach on that one. And then we've also got the Individual Assistance Act, which was really born out of our experience in Pajaro with the Speaker's office. We were, able to work with the governor's office, and with their support, we had a $125 million trailer bill that it was flood response contingency fund. So some of that money is directed to individuals that didn't qualify for federal assistance or state assistance. But what the chair would really like to do, and we'll come back next year with a proposal, is to dedicate a portion of the California Disaster Assistance Act that Cal OES uses to offset damage to public infrastructure, but to repurpose some of those funds to individuals to make sure that community-based organizations have an agreement in place or working relationship with Cal OES in advance, so that if there is a disaster and if there's undocumented people or if there's other people that don't qualify for federal assistance, there's already a program in place that Cal OES can show up and say, yes, you don't qualify for federal assistance, but there is state assistance available. So if you've been displaced, if you're, lost your job, your transportation, or, transportation to work or to school, there would be a program in place to help. So, I mean, that one's probably one of my bosses and mine that we're most passionate about. And then we've also got a couple other, bills that would, strengthen seismic retrofit incentives and improve resiliency of fire stations. And those are our legislative priorities. And just, what I really wanted to reiterate today, or to offer to the group, is, we're your Committee on Emergency Management. We work for you. We're here to help you. So, we're open to, if you have public safety or emergency management related issues, please use us as a resource. And we're also, Abby, we're here to support you too. So, let us know what we can do to help. We can do hearings, we can do legislation, we can, certainly be an advocate for funding in the budget and appropriations. And then we also send out, if anybody's interested, we send out a weekly newsletter that has, some mild commentary on news articles, but it also identifies all the grant opportunities that we think would make communities more resilient. And with that, I'd really, just open it up to any questions or comments you have. But again, look forward to working with you all, and hopefully, Laura, we can get together in person and figure out how we can be more helpful at the committee.
Great. Thank you, Mike. And a special thanks came through to you in the chat around your partnership working to support the Pajaro community in the recent winter storms. As a reminder to our attendees, you can submit a question at any time with the Q&A function. You can also respond to any comments in the chat if it's more of a commentary. Real quick, Mike, how can folks sign up for that newsletter that you just mentioned?
Yeah, you can. Best way is just shoot me an email. It's just mike.dayton@asm.ca.gov. You can also, ping us through our website. It's, at the Assembly Committee on Emergency Management.
Great. Thank you, Mike. We'll drop that in the chat. Thanks.
Thank you.
My team's way ahead of me. Good. All right. So back to you soon, Mike, with some other questions, I'm sure. Let me move over to Julia DiNatale from the Napa Valley Community Foundation to share some insights from her position at kind of the intersection of local, or at least county-based nonprofits and philanthropy.
Thanks, Laura. What I should have said in my intro is that our first true experience with disaster response happened in 2014 with the South Napa earthquake that affected the city of Napa pretty dramatically. And since that earthquake, we have been activated 5 times. So the lessons keep coming in terms of how can we be better? How can we prepare better? How can we respond better? And so I was asked to talk about some of the ways that our community foundation works with government or policymakers on disaster resilience. And one of the things that I'll keep coming back to, because I'm evangelical about it, is after the earthquake in 2014, but before we had some wildfires in 2017, we launched the first ever COAD in Napa County. And I'm sure you all know, but just in case, that's Community Organizations Active in Disaster, also known as VOADs in other places. And COADs exist primarily to facilitate communication and collaboration between nonprofits and government before, during, and after a disaster. Prior to launching and incubating and funding the COAD, that role was very disjointed. It mostly fell to the foundation, but it was not strategic or organized. And so by building the COAD, it now happens in a formalized way, takes pressure off of the community foundation as well as other individual nonprofits to be the go-between. And importantly, it actually built a more powerful advocacy contingency on the nonprofit side. And so since that time, COAD, in partnership with another nonprofit advocacy collaborative called Community Leaders Coalition, has been advocating more frequently and more successfully with local government. So a couple examples, language access in disaster communication is a big issue. I'm sure it is for all of you as well. And the COAD has been leading the efforts to advocate, access local government funding, and manage the language access program and transformation. Another example would be around the COAD members, the foundation working together to advocate for the uses of CARES Act funding and ARPA funding. And I think many of you have this experience as well. And pushing for not reinventing the wheel in terms of data that exists on unmet needs, nonprofits that exist to meet those needs, not wasting time or money on starting a new unmet needs assessment when that data exists from existing nonprofits. And so there have been some successes and some not so successes in that arena, but one of the successes has been getting our county government to agree to put a nice chunk of ARPA funding towards housing and childcare, because that is what our grantees and the COAD members were really advocating for around needs. Another way that we work with local government and policymakers is to try to be flexible and incubate or seed preparedness and resilience programs that can serve as proof points and hopefully leverage future government funding streams. So one example would be we built, after the fires we had in 2017, a construction workforce program that was included wraparound case management and support and was aimed towards undocumented heads of household, because existing programs were not open to undocumented folks. And so that's one that we have run and funded for 4 years now. And the hope is that with some workforce money coming through in California, that would no longer need to be philanthropically sustained. Another example is around some evacuation management software that the county was interested in implementing but didn't have the funding. And so on the promise that the county would dedicate capacity and infrastructure, we worked with another funder to purchase that program for them. I also was asked to talk about what do we see local nonprofits doing to prepare for disaster and crises most effectively. And here I told you I'd be a broken record on the effectiveness of COADs, but I would say a lesson for the foundation was we thought we would build this coad and it would go quiet from time to time. And as I mentioned, it's been activated 5 times. And so it really doesn't go quiet. And importantly, its role of training and technical assistance and disaster preparedness is much more robust than we originally and naively envisioned. And so one lesson is making sure that we always have a bit of a nest egg in our disaster relief fund to sustain the COAD's operations. It has to have paid staff. They have to be full-time. That is just what it takes to run this. And so through COAD, we also provide, we fund extra to provide trainings to develop and maintain emergency operation plans, continuity of operations plans. We also set up, again, after the 2014 earthquake, training for about 22 nonprofits to develop their emergency plans and then put in place automatic grants where we set aside the funds, and those funds can be deployed for immediate response as needed. And so we have now run that 4 different times. It's really successful. We are trying to maintain a bit of a savings in our disaster relief fund to ensure that we can do this, because that is how we get services out there before government dollars flow in. I think one thing that is really important, and my colleagues mentioned this, is funding existing nonprofits, existing local nonprofits to do this work. It's not always what people see on TV. It's not, big disaster response nonprofits coming in and doing the bulk of the work. It's those that work year round. And so the disasters, especially repeated disasters that happen on an annual basis, take a real toll on an agency that is beefing up to respond, working in the short term and the long term, as well as doing its regular work. And so my advocacy to make sure that there's capacity building funds for those organizations, that there is succession planning funds for those organizations. Burnout is real. Working in this response is it necessitates trauma-informed care and things like that will make a nonprofit strong before, during, and after a disaster, and not bleed it out and have it not available for the next disaster. I was also asked to talk about from our vantage point as a community foundation, what's essential for nonprofits and funders to know about disaster preparedness and response. Both Abby and Mike mentioned that relationships are key. I would underscore that for sure. We here at Napa Valley Community Foundation have developed a bit of a credo. So I'll just walk you through that really quick because it answers a lot of these questions. I mean, this is our theory and practice of disaster grant making. This is an obvious one. You all know disasters don't discriminate, but recovery does. And it is really important to center equity in all efforts, despite the cost. And what I mean is funders will come in after a disaster and distribute equally aid like a rainbird sprinkler. And that is not what people need. Multimillionaire does not need the same thing as an undocumented family that lives paycheck to paycheck. And so, it's not a rainbird. It's, an army of experienced people with pressure nozzle hoses directing resources where they need to go. And that is not a cheap date. And we need to not under-resource nonprofits to do that. They have to have financial infrastructure. They have to have programmatic infrastructure. They have to be able to work with clients in a holistic way that meets the needs of local families in every phase of disaster. And so that's, we have realized that essentially it brings with it like an administrative cost of about 25%. And we will defend that. It's a hard thing to defend to funders and donors, but we will defend that because you can really harm a nonprofit by asking them to do things that go far beyond what they have the capacity to do, as you all know. One of our other philosophies is look for disaster affected populations hidden in plain sight. I think you all know this was mentioned, but the populations most affected are often not the ones shown on the news. Here in Napa County, it tends to be our undocumented farm worker and hospitality workforce. Thanks to Abby and her colleagues, California government has done a much better job of recognizing this, but most federal programs, subsidies are not open to undocumented families. And so this is, again, where it takes discernment to distribute direct financial assistance. And it's not just financial assistance. So, another lesson is that financial aid is paramount, but it can't stand alone. And so that's where that 25% in funding comes in. I mean, we will defend the role of human services because you can't just cut somebody a check. People need more than just money in the bank, and people need you to stick with them through all phases. And so that is really important in our philosophies. And then I think the ensuring that when we talk about responding in all phases, we're talking about before disasters as well. And so that's not just preparedness programs, that's putting some things in place, like our automatic grant program, and making sure that that happens well in advance of fire season each year. We also, one of our lessons learned has been to make sure that we are advocating to local government to give our nonprofit space in the local assistance center from day one when it opens. The data and intelligence we get from people who walk through that door is critical to deciding what we need to do in the next phase. And the money comes in when the news cycle is running, and when the news cycle ends, the money doesn't come in anymore. And so we call that the Forrest Gump rule: life is like a box of chocolates. We have to do our best to gather intel on what people are going to need at every phase so that we can allocate dollars for future phases. We also, of course, leverage government funding, but we often need to utilize funds to get out there before the government funding comes in. And what that means is we employ clawback clauses in all of our grant making, because if we get out there and say, okay, people need XYZ, and then government funding becomes available for that, we'll pull back that funding and utilize it and deploy it elsewhere. I think I was also asked to talk about what would we do to improve disaster preparedness and response. And this was touched upon a little bit by my colleagues, but if we could help with a paradigm or narrative shift, that funding in between disasters and before disasters for things like preparedness programs, but also just capacity building of nonprofits, things like succession planning, training, is critical. It would be immensely helpful, not only to the nonprofits, but to funders like us who are, we're not heavily endowed. We don't have a pot of money that exists. And so we're just trying to allocate the dollars that come in from donors who I think are expecting us just to rebuild houses, to fund the things that we know are critical that are not necessarily the things on donors' minds. Somebody mentioned this in the chat, but how can we collectively make the case that preparedness and resilience, not just response and recovery, are important? And how can we make the case that when we talk about climate change and climate justice and climate equity, we are talking about disaster, and how can we better understand and direct resources toward that nexus?
Julia, thank you so much for all of that, and also for your advocacy on behalf of your local nonprofits, but also for kind of best practices in this space generally across the state. And thank you for touching back on that question around what phase of response or preparedness or resilience are we channeling our attention, but also our resources toward. I'd love to go back to Abby and then Mike with that question, if you have anything to share in terms of how your organization approaches that question as you look at actually allocating state resources, not just philanthropy resources? How do you think about, is it recovery and response versus preparedness and resilience? How are we balancing those different approaches?
Yeah, just from our perspective, I mean, we've been looking at the hazard mitigation funding, what the priorities are there. Obviously, there's a huge conversation that I didn't mention about the availability and affordability of insurance. So, I mean, we're like, hey, if we're spending hundreds of millions of dollars, communities are investing, even local ordinances on wildfire mitigation plans, why don't the insurers recognize that? So, I mean, we're going to have a number of oversight hearings on that. But, our chair is, huge on investing up front in preparedness. I mean, we've got a couple entities in the state, partners of Abby's, that are building community resilience centers. There's a huge grant program to, how do we take care of, displaced people, investing more at the fairgrounds, but we're trying to look at it on the other end. How do we prevent people from being displaced in the first place? Like, so make their homes more seismically resilient. If they're in floodplains, give them greater flood protection. But I mean, the same with fire mitigation. So I really think it's a budget issue, but it's a conversation that Abby, I think we're going to want to have with Cal OES. Like, how do you look holistically at all the hazard mitigation investments, climate resiliency investments in California? And I mean, should there be more of a resiliency czar like some of the cities and counties have, to make sure those dollars are actually reducing, risk? And so anyway, I'll let you chime in, but I think we're definitely on the side of favor mitigation more. So.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's not really a response recovery versus preparedness, resiliency, but it's it really, just being completely transparent here, it comes down to how much money we have. It's the budget, and we're coming into some lean years. And unfortunately, we have to react. We have to react to the disasters. And we have great partners like Mike with the Emergency Management Committee that advocate for these things on the legislative side. But, it's the whole government response. We have the executive branch, the legislative branch. We have to come together. And it's competing priorities, and we only have so much money in the pot. Education gets so much, social services get so much, how do we do that within this past few years? I'm quite proud of the efforts that we have done, the administration as well as the legislative leaders, on the resiliency measures. There's millions of dollars that have gone into that. And I do think that we need to do a better job of talking about that, so people do know that we're trying and we're making those efforts. I strongly would like to say, and I'm not an expert in any way, that I think that the reason that our fires have not been nearly as destructive as they could have been, knock on wood, recently, is because of some of these efforts that we've done with the hazard mitigation and the pre-positioning and the community building and resiliency, et cetera. And so it's very easy to look at a disaster and say, why didn't we do more? But it's very hard to look at a non-disaster and say, oh, we did this, and so this didn't happen. And so all that being said, it's all about priorities. And so the louder the voices are coming from the community saying, we need this, the more argument that folks like myself and Mike, the emergency management folks in the government, can make that argument that we need more of the state's investment in this area. And so that's a good way to do that.
Great. Thank you both for touching on that. There's a comment in the chat about this being a useful conversation as we think about maybe what is the big boogeyman in California, or has been maybe for the longest the big one, right? An earthquake scenario, whether it's an overlapping crisis with other things going on or standalone. Could you point folks toward any preparedness resources, guides around earthquake preparedness specifically, and who, maybe Abby or Mike, whoever chimes in on this first, you could also say a few words about the Listos California initiative, and whether that is included in that purview.
Yeah, I can do that. There's quite a bit about earthquake preparedness. That is the big boogeyman. We are terrified of it. It is the earthquake in the Bay Area or the earthquake in the Los Angeles basin. The world will stop when that happens. I don't think people realize just how much commerce goes in and out of those areas and what's going to happen. It's a massive fear of all the cascading events that I see. So we've got a lot of preparedness. Lots of efforts have gone into the earthquake preparedness of the buildings, of getting things ready. Mike touched a little bit on the earthquake early warning system. We've gotten a lot of technology and money poured into that to try to get it better. But yes, so I can share at some point, Laura, with you, if you want to share with the participants, earthquake preparedness. We have the Earthquake Country Alliance. We have all of our local governments that are in earthquake country have a lot of earthquake preparedness. We have Seismic Safety Commission. We have the California Earthquake Authority. Lots of stuff. Happy to share that. Listos California. So Listos California was a campaign that the governor launched a few years ago, and it was extremely successful. And so it's been turned into a program. And the legislature has seen fit to give us being Cal OES, $25 million every year to give out grants to CBOs serving underserved communities to try to bring them into that. Part of that Listos program is developing preparedness materials, culturally competent preparedness materials, as well as in different languages for the different disasters that they may be facing. And so there's a lot of that available at listoscalifornia.org. A lot of toolkits out there that for CBOs to then prepare your clientele. And then keep in mind that we do have those grants that go out, and those are annual grants. And that's an amazing thing that we get $25 million every year to push that out. And we're doing the best we can. I think the next cycle, I don't know when exactly the RFP will go out, but I'm thinking our plan is in January, so that way there's time. But it's the same thing. And so I highly encourage all of you to apply for that, because if you serve anyone in California, then you serve the people that we're trying to target with Listos California.
Yeah, and Abby, I think that's great. I would just, recommend anybody. I think I saw in chat that somebody had a building that may be in need of a retrofit or or an inspection, but really try to connect with your county office of emergency services or your local emergency manager, because they're going to be the ones that apply for the grants from Cal OES. They're going to identify, one, you should know who your local emergency manager is and make sure you're part of their overall emergency plan. But if you have a specific need at a building, then that should also be considered for, what the priorities are for the hazard mitigation at the local level. So.
Great. Thank you both for that. With fewer than 10 minutes left, I'm almost afraid to ask about insurance, but can anyone give us a quick snapshot of kind of where we are? What are we really dealing with? We hear a lot in the news about the looming insurance crisis, maybe the current insurance crisis for some communities in California. What are the major nuts and bolts of that? And how's that going to be hashed out in terms of statewide policy?
Yeah, we're trying to draw more attention to it through our hearings. I know there's also a conversation that I'm not directly part of that the insurance, commissioner is having with the insurers. Obviously they, have proposed that, hey, they want to go to cap modeling, which is my, basic understanding is, it's prohibited right now. So you look at previous, claims, and so it lags. So I think the insurers would argue, hey, we, since we didn't have cap modeling, we hadn't been charging people the cost of insurance in the past of what it actually would cost. So if we use cap modeling, yeah, the rates are going to go up, but there will be more availability. So we're obviously looking at alternate, like the insurance of last resort in California, the FAIR plan. So if you can't get insurance on your home or your business. Outside, like separately, independently, I think we need to take a more holistic approach. Like Japan has basically partnered with a company that looks at all the adjacent infrastructure. So they not only look at the risk of, a specific entity, but they also look at all the lifeline infrastructure around it. And so that, I think, would help us inform the hazard mitigation investments more, so that when we do spend federal hazard mitigation funds, that one of the key performance indicators has got to be, how is it going to impact insurance rates or the availability of insurance? That's not part of the calculus that I understand that we use when we make those investments. So Abby, I don't know if that's, you guys are looking at that or not, but.
Yeah, I can just tell you it's ugly. It's a very complex situation. I cannot speak to the policy things one way or another. If policy were to come out on the statewide, like Mike said, the insurance commissioner is a constitutionally elected office. We'll be handling a lot of that. The governor has weighed in quite a bit, and I know the legislative leaders are very intent on this as well. All of them, I can guarantee you, are realizing the gravity of the situation and are working very hard to try to come to some solutions for this. I know that I personally have been on some different task forces coming up with wildfire mitigation and making suggestions, saying, hey, we've done A, B, C, and D. Can't you lower the rates? And can't this work for some of that? But ultimately, we're capitalists, and insurance is a business, and they don't have to work here if they don't want to. And so we're trying to use our might, being the state of California and the amount of consumers that we have, to come to some solutions. So having said that, I can't tell you where it's going, but I can tell you that it is going somewhere, and that our leadership, all of our elected leaders, are very much in tune with this and very much all on the same page, representing California, trying to get to a solution.
Thank you so much for touching on that briefly. That feels like a future California Policy Forum topic in the making, and maybe we'll try to find a little bit more of a cheerful framing. But it is a current challenge, and it does shape our sector and how we can respond and prepare for disasters. I want to take a moment to thank our speakers again for sharing their wisdom and expertise and some insights with us today. I also want to remind everyone that is tuning in that this is part of a series, and that we do want to hear your ideas on what you would like us to help you demystify in terms of the policy and legislative landscape, both statewide and locally, about issues that are important to you in the social sector. So stay tuned for announcements of future California policy forums, and consider this an open invitation to chime in to help us to design those. I'll also remind everyone that you will, if you registered for this session, be getting the recording, the slides that were shared, the resources that have come through into the chat, as well as, I believe, the chat itself. So you'll see that within about a week or so. Some of our speakers have also shared their contact information for any follow-up on some of the resources that they mentioned. I invite you all to do that now if you haven't already. And I want to thank the speakers again. I want to thank our co-hosts, Cal Nonprofits, the Philanthropy California Coalition, for helping us bring this program to you. We look forward to seeing you at the next California Policy Forum, and goodbye for now. Thanks, everyone.